This is my intro video to more of the partisan tactics, and that will also include their method of transport, how they communicate, how they use camouflage, and how they move about, and how they prepared their positions and utilize terrain to their advantage, and also pre-established structures or rubble thereof and other methods. Now, I already showed you, like building blocks, I introduced you to common outdoor and building tactics, whether that's building assault or building clearing. And I also showed you the outdoors. And I showed you an instance already in the story where it all came together, which was when I showed you right here how the school was captured by Corporal Way's company in the third story. And you saw a little bit of that when I created that video just on that. And yeah, I'm going to move along from that and go into more details, such as how they utilized what they had available to them for their best advantage. Now, when Br0ken B0w, for instance, when that story started out, and the Cav Scouts, as the airport was being built up and turned into a fob, before that even happened, right as the CHI-COM units moved into it, and Gary, the character who was out hunting, who heard the noise of the vehicles and found out that there were foreign troops there, and ran back into town, taking his ATV with him, which is here among the transport examples. There's a technical, which a technical is a truck or a vehicle of any civilian model that you can mount a machine gun or maybe a mortar tube in the back or an anti-tank missile system. And also, you can do the same with an ATV, which is a mortar and base plate here. You can set that on the back and have just one person driving it, maybe someone hanging off the side or something, but you can do the same with a tripod-mounted AT missile system, or even a machine gun like I have here. You can put them on the back. And they were used that way in the stories. Others used horses for travel, if you can remember in the second story. That was also done in the first. And, of course, captured PLA and PAP and other vehicles, mostly like the VP models, like the Scout vehicles that are similar to a Jeep. A lot of those ended up being captured and used. But also, there's various types of instances where the ebb and flow of things began, and people were taking what civilian vehicles they had, loaded down with supplies, and driving off north on 259 to the cabins here. Well, they originally basically had nothing but ATVs and technicals. Now, over time, there would be less technicals as it became harder and harder to get fuel. But within the first year, technicals were a common method of transport for partisan elements. And eventually, their original base camp here would be overrun by the CHI-COMs in their Operation Skull Bash. And they were forced out of the Hokatown and 259 and 259A area here in the mountains by the lake. They were forced down into the valley at first, and the CHI-COMs went after them and pursued them, and that is when they learned how to become semi-nomadic, moving from prepared place to prepared place, which I told you about in the last video. That was all about the difference between nomadism and semi-nomadism, where people are forced to either move between prepared places where the infrastructure is mostly entirely intact, or just stay on the move permanently as permanent nomads. But they used the transportation they had available to them to the best of their abilities, and they used things like technicals, ATVs, and even horses. Before they even began to capture CHICOM and other foreign vehicles, but that didn't happen as often as, say, the use of these other three types of implements. And later, after the first year, it became more relegated to simply ATVs and dirt bikes and horses, because as fuel ran out again, they depended less and less on technicals. Of course, fuel could still be found because during the invasion, millions upon millions of American privately owned vehicles had to be abandoned or were destroyed or partially destroyed, and there's still fuel left in some of those tanks that would be siphoned. And salvage in a foreign invasion would become a very lucrative type of a business. Salvage of fuel, salvage of supplies, just salvage in general would just be a lucrative partisan industry. To acquire fuel, to be able to power their vehicles and ATVs and other things. And of course, you had supply convoys being hit, which happens in every single solitary insurge, counter-insurge type conflict known to man in modern history. Supply convoys are always sought after by the rebels or partisan elements or guerrillas, whatever you want to call them, insurge. And that is essentially what the transportation was, which also served as how they communicated long distance, because you have to remember, in the stories and even in the docuseries that basically parallels these stories, the cyber attack and anti-satellite weaponry destroyed all satellites that belonged to the United States, and they also basically destroyed the entire communications network, whether it be telecom or internet, so on and so forth. So essentially it went back to the 1800s, early 1900s, where people relied upon runners to get messages back and forth. Now your runners would be using more of your ATVs, dirt bikes, and horses to get messages back and forth. And now you saw a lot of that not only in the first story about rural Br0ken B0w, but you also saw it in the urban story, which will be covered next in the second story about urban and suburban Phoenix area, which is Phoenix and its surrounding areas. That story was made to highlight the perils of urban conflict and the dangers and the things that one would have to look out for in such a conflict. And in the third story, yet there was still even more about urban, because there was a lot of urban stuff going on in that story, if you can remember. Now, when I go more into the camouflage aspect of using terrain and even wearable camouflage in the next video, I will highlight specific instances of how the partisans used primitive ingenuity and primitive materials that were readily available to them to be able to even come up with specific types of camouflage. But there was also enemy camouflage, because they took CHICOM PLA uniforms and they gave them to the to the Gers, which along with the ID cards and being able to speak Mandarin, allowed them to get into many places that the Americans could never even dream of getting into themselves. So again, this is just about the transportation, more or less. And in the next video, I will take it more into how they utilize different types of terrain to their advantage with these methods of transport and camouflage. So hopefully this video is also educational, and I will be adding it to my playlist of the story review and dissection videos. So may Yeshua bless and keep you all always.